She should have watched where she was going, Karen Ellison said, her voice sharp enough to cut glass. She stood in my driveway, the HOA violation notice pressed against my chest like a verdict. Your daughter damaged HOA property, Mr. Halpern. Reckless behavior under your supervision. My 9-year-old Lily stood behind me, her small wrist wrapped in a fresh cast, tears streaking through the dirt on her cheeks. Karen, president of the Cedarbrook Estates HOA, didn't even glance at her. Bryce didn't mean it, she added, smug. He's a good boy, and for your information, he's untouchable. Something inside me snapped. Untouchable? I repeated, my voice steady but cold. He broke her wrist. Karen smirked, already turning to leave. File whatever report you want. My attorney's on speed dial. She started walking away. That's when I dropped it. The first truth she wasn't expecting. Good, I said, because you'll need him long before I do. Before I go on, subscribe now, because what happened next turned our entire neighborhood upside down. What started with a broken swing ended with her lawyer begging me for mercy. My name's David Halpern. I'm a civil engineer, licensed by the state to sign off on public safety infrastructure, the kind of guy who knows when a bolt is too weak to hold a child's weight. I don't shout. I don't bluff. I measure things for a living. Karen didn't know that yet. Lily's cast was white with blue crayon doodles. Little birds, she said, would help it heal faster. She'd fallen from the swing at Maple Hollow Park yesterday afternoon after Karen's son shoved her. There had been no apology, no concern, just Karen showing up later to warn me about defamatory talk. The same park she oversaw as HOA maintenance chair. The same swing she'd ordered, replaced last month with cheaper materials to cut costs. And now she was fining me $600 for equipment damage. I watched her walk away, clipboard swinging from her manicured hand, and felt something I hadn't felt since my wife's funeral. A quiet, calculated fury. Karen's arrogance wasn't just cruelty, it was confidence built on power she'd never been forced to justify. People feared her. They moved away instead of fighting back. And that's exactly how she liked it. When Lily was born, my wife and I promised we'd build a life where she could feel safe, where the world couldn't just decide she didn't matter. After my wife passed, that promise became everything. We moved to Cedarbrook because it looked peaceful, predictable, controlled. I thought an HOA meant safety, rules, order. Turns out, it just meant power in the wrong hands. Now that same system, the one meant to protect families, was punishing my daughter for being hurt. And not just any daughter, my daughter, who just lost her mother, who spent afternoons at that park sketching cardinals and sparrows on the back of old blueprints from my office. That swing was her place to remember her mom, and Karen had just turned it into evidence against us. The absurdity of it all burned like acid. A 9-year-old, blamed for her own broken wrist. A playground turned into a battlefield. I could have yelled, slammed doors, posted rants online, but that's not how you dismantle someone like Karen Ellison. You don't fight her on emotion. You fight her with precision. When I finally went back inside, the notice still in my hand, I read every word like an engineer reading a stress diagram. Failure to report damage, reckless supervision, potential HOA disciplinary action. They were counting on fear, counting on my silence. But they'd just filed a violation against someone who spends his life proving what's unsafe, and who knows exactly which law to call when a public structure isn't up to code. Lily was sitting on the couch, clutching her sketchbook. "Dad," she whispered, "am I in trouble?" I knelt beside her and brushed her hair from her face. "No, sweetheart, but they are." Outside, Karen's SUV idled for a moment before driving off. I watched her license plate disappear around the corner and felt something settle in me, a kind of stillness engineers understand. The moment before the pressure breaks. She thought she was untouchable, but she didn't know that safety compliance isn't just a job, it's a weapon when you know where to point it, and tomorrow I was going to start aiming. The next morning, I drove Lily to school and watched her wave with her left hand, her right still trapped in the cast. She was trying to be brave, smiling through the pain, but every time I saw that stiff white shell around her wrist, I thought of Karen Ellison's voice saying her son was untouchable. That word had turned into a challenge. When I got home, I parked near the Maple Hollow Park entrance, the same place where everything had started, and saw something I hadn't noticed before. a freshly printed HOA bulletin tacked to the notice board. The headline read, "Reminder, unsafe behavior in public spaces will not be tolerated." Underneath was a paragraph about parents ensuring proper supervision, and a closing note signed by Karen herself. It was dated less than 12 hours after our confrontation. I wasn't the only one reading it. A woman in running shoes stood nearby, shaking her head. She looked about my age, maybe a little older, wearing a Cedarbrook sweatshirt. "That's about your kid, isn't it?" she asked quietly. I nodded. "I'm sorry," she said. "Karen's been pulling this stunt for years. Last summer she fined a family for unauthorized landscaping because their autistic son planted sunflowers near the mailbox. Her name was Danielle, a single mom who'd lived here longer than anyone else I'd met. She said Karen had a pattern, starting conflicts, weaponizing, fines, and driving people out until only her loyal followers remained. You'll notice," Danielle added, "the same people always sit at the front during board meetings. They clap when she speaks." She gestured toward the playground. "Half the neighborhood's afraid to say anything." I wanted to ask why no one had ever stood up to her, but the answer was already clear. Karen's power wasn't in her title. It was in the silence she created. She didn't need to be right. She just needed everyone else too scared to check. Danielle lowered her voice. "You know the worst part? That swing's been a problem for months. I told her it creaked every time my nephew used it. She said, 'Budget's tight. Tell the kids to use the slide.' That caught my attention." "You told her personally?" I asked. "Twice," she said, and both times she brushed it off." I looked at the swing, the one with the missing seat now taped off with flimsy caution tape. The chains hung slack, the bolts rusted orange. My stomach turned. This wasn't just negligence, it was neglect hiding under bureaucracy. I thanked Danielle and walked back to my truck. As I sat there, I opened the HOA's website on my phone. It was polished, efficient, and filled with legal jargon. Under maintenance reports, the last inspection for Maple Hollow Park was dated 8 months ago. Every other community space showed monthly entries. That alone was suspicious. When I tried to click on the attached file, it redirected to an access restricted page. Members could request access through board approval. That's when the pattern came into focus. Karen had built an echo chamber, tight control, selective transparency, and constant intimidation. But systems like that have pressure points, and I'd just found one. When I pulled into my driveway, the afternoon sun glared off Karen's silver SUV parked 2 houses down. She was talking to one of her board members, gesturing toward my property with exaggerated annoyance. I didn't need to hear her words to know what she was saying. Disruptive, dangerous, problem neighbor. I almost laughed. I'd seen that look before, on construction site managers who'd just been told a bridge they approved failed inspection. Overconfidence before collapse. Inside, I grabbed my work laptop and began taking notes. Everything. Dates, conversations, photos of the swing, Danielle's statement. I wasn't thinking like a victim anymore. I was thinking like an engineer. I remembered the phrase Karen had thrown at me. "You can file whatever report you want." Maybe I would. That evening, while Lily colored birds at the kitchen table, I read through HOA bylaws, scrolling past pages of rules about fencing, lawn heights, and mailbox paint. Buried in the fine print was a line about all shared structures requiring periodic inspection under county safety code. That was it, the weak bolt holding her empire together. The park wasn't purely private property. Because it was a communal recreation area accessible to the public, it fell under county jurisdiction for safety standards. Karen might control her board, but she didn't control the county. I looked up from the laptop. Lily was asleep on her notebook, her tiny hand resting over a half-finished bluebird sketch. I gently lifted it and smiled. For the first time since this started, I felt something close to relief. The board thought they were fighting a neighbor. They didn't realize they just picked a fight with someone who spent his career proving where things break and how to make sure someone's held accountable when they do. Tomorrow, I'd start testing the limits of Karen's authority, and if her system cracked like that swing, I wouldn't be surprised. The next morning, I walked into the HOA office, a narrow building tucked behind the pool house with a plaque that read, Cedarbrook Estates Management. Inside, the air smelled like printer toner and fake citrus. A row of file cabinets lined the wall, and behind the desk, sat a man I recognized from community events, Terrell Novak, the property manager. His tie was slightly askew, and his eyes flicked up from his computer screen with the kind of weary politeness that comes from dealing with too many angry homeowners. "Morning," I said, holding the violation notice. "I need to appeal this." I placed it on the counter between us. The paper still had a faint crease from where Karen had shoved it against me. Terrell looked at it, then at me. "Ah, Mr. Halpern, right? I heard there was an incident." His voice was careful, the kind people use when they're afraid of saying the wrong thing. He adjusted his glasses and glanced toward the inner office where Karen's nameplate glimmered on the frosted glass door. "She's not in right now," he added quickly. "That's fine," I said. "I'm not here for her. I just want to know where she got the inspection report for the park equipment. I checked the HOA website. The last one listed is from 8 months ago." His fingers froze mid-typing. He didn't answer immediately, just pressed his lips together, then started tapping the keyboard again, as if he hadn't heard me. The fluorescent lights buzzed above us, the sound filling the silence. "Terrell," I said quietly, "you're the property manager. You'd know if the playground was inspected recently." He swallowed hard. "Sir, I can only discuss information that's been approved for member access." That was the line. I could tell he'd rehearsed it. But his body told a different story. His shoulders tensed, his foot shifted under the desk, and he glanced toward the door again, like a man expecting an ambush. He wasn't hiding arrogance. He was hiding fear. "Look," I said, keeping my tone level. "My daughter broke her wrist because one of those swings failed. I'm not here to start a war, but if that park's out of compliance with county safety code, you and I both know it's not just an HOA issue." He looked up sharply, his eyes widening for a second before he caught himself. His hand brushed the desk, knocking over a pen. He picked it up slowly, avoiding my gaze. "Mr. Halpern, I'm sorry about your daughter, truly, but Karen handles all vendor communications. He stopped mid-sentence, realizing he'd said too much. "Handles them directly?" I asked. "As in, she decides which maintenance gets reported and which doesn't." His throat tightened, the pulse in his neck jumping. He leaned back in his chair and rubbed the side of his face, his voice barely above a whisper. "I don't—" Another pause. "I don't make those decisions." For a moment, neither of us spoke. Outside the window, a gardener's leaf blower whined in the distance. I could almost hear the weight of the man's conscience grinding against his fear of Karen. He looked like someone who'd been told to keep his job or lose everything. "You have kids, Terrell?" I asked. He hesitated, then nodded. "A niece," he said softly. "She plays at Maple Hollow when she visits." That was the moment his mask cracked. His jaw tightened, and his eyes darted toward the door one more time before landing back on mine. The silence stretched so long that the hum of the overhead light sounded like static. "I just want the truth," I said. "That's all. If the paperwork's missing, fine, I'll go through the county. But if someone's skipping inspections, they're putting every kid in this neighborhood at risk, including your niece." He closed his eyes briefly, exhaling through his nose. When he opened them again, something had shifted. Not defiance, resolve fighting its way through fear. "There's maintenance logs," he said carefully. "But not all of them are uploaded. Some were marked internal only." "By who?" I asked, already knowing the answer. He hesitated so long, I thought he wouldn't say it. Then, in a voice that barely carried, "By Mrs. Ellison." He stood abruptly, gathering papers into a neat stack, clearly ending the conversation. "That's all I can say," he muttered, avoiding my eyes. But as I turned to leave, he called after me quietly. "Be careful, Mr. Halpern. You don't know how far she's willing to go to protect her reputation." I paused at the door. "Then maybe it's time someone tested how strong it really is." His eyes flicked toward Karen's empty office again. The movement was small, but the message was clear. There was more he wanted to say, but couldn't. Not yet. I walked out knowing one thing for certain. Karen's power didn't come from authority. It came from the silence of men like him. And now, that silence had started to crack. When I stepped out of the HOA office, the sunlight hit me like a slap. The world outside was too calm for what I'd just learned. Karen Ellison had been skipping official maintenance logs, something that, for anyone else, would mean fines or termination. For her, it was just another secret folded into her power. I could still see Terrell's face when he said her name, his voice shaking, his eyes fixed on the door like it could hear him. He was caught in her orbit, and he knew it. I sat in my truck for a long minute, staring at the neat rows of identical houses across the street, every window blind drawn at the same height. Everything here was designed to look perfect, and perfection, I was beginning to realize, was the camouflage Karen used best. That evening, Cedarbrook's inbox pinged with a new HOA announcement. It came through at 6:47 p.m., just as I was making dinner for Lily. The subject line read, "Community Conduct and Safety Reminder." When I opened it, the blood in my veins went cold. The first paragraph referred to a recent incident involving parental negligence at the Maple Hollow playground. It didn't name us, but it didn't have to. The closing paragraph warned residents to refrain from spreading misinformation that damages community reputation. It was signed, of course, by Karen Ellison, HOA president. Lily was at the table sketching birds again, humming softly to herself, oblivious to the storm gathering outside our walls. I read the email twice, each sentence heavier than the last. She was turning my daughter's injury into a public warning. That's how she fought, through shame, not evidence. My phone buzzed again. This time it was Danielle, the neighbor I'd met at the park. "You saw it too, huh?" she said before I could speak. Her voice was hushed, nervous. "People are talking in the Facebook group. They think you're suing the HOA. Karen's saying you're trying to destroy property values." I stared out the window at the trimmed lawns glowing under porch lights. "Let her talk," I said. "She's not the one who decides what's safe out here." Danielle hesitated. "You really think you can stop her?" I didn't answer immediately. My mind went back to Terrell's small confession, the missing maintenance logs, the inspections labeled internal. It wasn't just corruption, it was evidence of liability. "I don't need to stop her," I finally said. "I just need to make her system fail in front of the right people." After Lily went to bed, I printed the HOA email, highlighted the phrases that crossed legal boundaries: defamation, negligence, false representation. It wasn't just a message, it was intimidation. I folded it into a manila folder marked Cedarbrook Case Notes and began my real work. By 10, I was in my garage, laptop balanced on the hood of my truck. My profession had always required documentation, clear, time-stamped, precise. I treated this the same way I'd treat a structural failure: cause, chain reaction, consequence. I logged everything: the date of the injury, Karen's verbal, statement about her son being untouchable, Danielle's testimony about ignored safety warnings, and Terrell's confirmation of missing records. One line in my notes stood out: "No inspection since county code update. Public safety jurisdiction triggered." That was the pivot point. Karen thought she ran Cedarbrook like a monarch. She didn't understand the law that separated private management from public safety oversight. The playground wasn't an HOA-owned private garden. It was a shared-use recreation area. That one classification meant the county, not Karen, had final say in safety compliance. I just had to prove non-compliance. Around midnight, I heard footsteps outside. I peered through the blinds. Karen's silver SUV rolled past slowly, her headlights sweeping across my driveway. She wasn't even subtle. She paused for a full 5 seconds, just long enough to let me know she was watching. I stepped out onto the porch, phone in hand, and pretended to take a call. Her SUV idled. I could almost see her smirk behind the tinted glass. Then she drove off, tires crunching over the perfect asphalt she'd bragged about resurfacing last year. I didn't move until her taillights vanished around the corner. Inside, I forwarded her email to my work account and a backup drive. The moment it left the HOA server, it became something she couldn't delete. I added a short note to myself. "Tomorrow. Confirm maintenance permits, request safety codes." I went to check on Lily one last time. She was asleep, her hand resting over her cast, the crayon drawings scattered around her like small, colorful shields. I knelt beside her bed and whispered, "We're not going anywhere." Because Karen Ellison had just crossed from intimidation into negligence. And if she wanted to turn this into a public spectacle, I'd let her. She had no idea that I was about to drag her empire into the light, where no HOA authority could protect her, not from county law and not from me. The next morning, I drove straight to Maple Hollow Park with my tool bag in the back seat. The neighborhood was quiet, that eerie weekday calm when everyone's pretending their lives are perfect behind drawn curtains. I parked near the empty playground, stepped out, and felt the early sun already burning against the back of my neck. The caution tape still fluttered weakly around the broken swing, the one Karen claimed my daughter had damaged. The bolts glinted in the light, dull and cheap, like the kind you'd find on a backyard set bought online. I crouched beside the support beam, running my fingers over the metal joint. The outer paint was already flaking, exposing corrosion beneath it. My thumb brushed over a manufacturer's stamp, RMX 340 zinc, not the required R440 steel grade listed in county code. I didn't need to check twice. Zinc wasn't rated for structural weight bearing at all. Whoever installed this had swapped certified hardware for cheaper substitutes. My jaw tightened as I took out my phone and snapped a photo from every angle, focusing on the bolt heads, the stamped markings, the rust halo spreading like rot around the holes. A shadow fell across the ground behind me. I turned to see Danielle walking her dog, leash wrapped twice around her wrist. She slowed when she noticed me kneeling at the swing set. "You're really going through with this, huh?" she asked quietly. "Just documenting facts," I said, still crouched. "No opinions, no gossip, just what's visible." She came closer, lowering her voice. "You should be careful. Karen's saying you trespassed here after hours." I looked up at the sign bolted to the fence. "Park hours, sunrise to sunset." I smiled faintly. "It's 9:12 a.m. Danielle exhaled, relief and fear tangled together. She's not used to anyone standing their ground. "She will be," I said. I moved to the swing post, inspecting the weld points where the chain mount connected. The metal wasn't just cheap, it was dangerously brittle. I tapped it lightly with the handle of my wrench, and a fine crack spidered through the paint. "That's not from use," I murmured. "That's fatigue failure." Danielle frowned. Meaning the structure was defective before my daughter even sat on it. Her expression darkened. "So, all this—" She gestured at the tape, the warning signs, the fine, for reckless supervision. Was her covering her own mistake? I stood, slipping the wrench back into my bag. "Not mistake," I said. "Choice." She didn't reply, but the silence said enough. When I got home, I transferred the photos to my computer, labeling each with coordinates and timestamps. Years of engineering work had made this process second nature, cataloging, labeling, verifying. I zoomed in on the images and compared the metal codes to the county's public materials registry. The RMX bolts Karen used weren't even approved for public installation. They were listed under consumer-grade decorative fasteners. The pieces were falling together fast. The budget cuts she bragged about weren't efficiency, they were fraud. She'd pocketed savings by substituting inferior materials, then buried the paper trail under internal-only logs. The moment that swing failed, she'd crossed into negligence with traceable evidence. I sat back, adrenaline mixing with the cold satisfaction of precision. I knew exactly what I was looking at. A safety violation under county jurisdiction. And once reported, it couldn't be ignored. By noon, I drafted a preliminary report. Incident site, Maple Hollow Park. Observed hardware inconsistent with county safety standards. Potential violation of Code 52A, Public Use Structure Integrity. Recommendation, immediate inspection. I printed it, stamped the pages with my state license number, and signed my name at the bottom, my professional seal, something Karen couldn't touch. When I stepped outside, the neighborhood looked frozen, like a postcard. Sprinklers ticked in unison, mailboxes gleamed, and Karen's SUV sat parked at the corner, facing my driveway. She was inside, pretending to check her phone. Watching. Always watching. I walked right past her car, the report tucked under my arm, her window lowered halfway. "Going somewhere, Mr. Halpern?" Her voice carried that sharp sweetness only people in power perfect. "Downtown," I said. "You'll find out why soon enough?" Her smile faltered just a little, but she masked it with a laugh. "You can't win this. I've dealt with bigger complaints than yours." I leaned closer, resting my hands on the edge of her car window. "Then you should know," I said softly. "County safety violations don't go through HOA committees. They go straight to the state." Her expression froze. I stepped back and kept walking. When I reached my truck, my phone buzzed. A message from Terrell. No text, just a photo attachment, a screenshot of an email. The subject line read, Maintenance budget adjustments, use RMX supplier. The sender was Karen. The timestamp matched 2 weeks before Lily's accident. I sat there, staring at the screen, heart hammering. He hadn't said anything directly, but I understood. It was his way of speaking without speaking. Proof existed, and he wanted me to have it. I took a breath, then turned the key in the ignition. My next stop wasn't the HOA office. It was the County Public Safety Division. Karen Ellison thought she'd written the final chapter of this story. She didn't realize I was just starting the report that would end her reign, bolt by bolt. The County Public Safety Division was located downtown, inside a beige municipal building that looked as tired as the officials who worked there. I parked beside a faded fire lane and carried the manila folder under my arm like evidence in a trial. Inside, the air smelled of paper, coffee, and stale air conditioning. A receptionist directed me to an office labeled Public Infrastructure Compliance. The woman behind the desk barely looked up when I approached. "Filing a report?" she asked. "Safety concern," I said, sliding the folder across. "Playground in Cedar Brook Estates. Equipment failure caused injury to a child. Possible violation of County Code 52A. That made her look up. "Are you a resident or a contractor?" "Both," I said. "I'm a state-licensed civil engineer. The injury was my daughter's." Something in my tone must have told her this wasn't a typical complaint. She nodded slowly. "You'll want to submit this through Inspector Lowell's office. He handles private community safety compliance. Down the hall, room 214. The man in room 214 was graying, heavy-set, and looked like he'd spent 20 years dealing with people who lied to him. "Halpern, you said?" he asked, flipping through my documentation. "Civil. An engineer, City of Maple County certified." His eyebrows lifted. "All right, Mr. Halpern, walk me through it." I laid the photos across his desk, corroded bolts, cracked welds, and the manufacturer's markings that didn't belong. He leaned in close, frowning. "This is RMX zinc hardware," he said. "That's residential grade. It shouldn't be on a public playground." "Exactly," I replied. "And according to Cedar Brook's own records, their last inspection was filed 8 months ago. That's 4 months beyond the compliance window. The HOA president authorized the replacements herself." He looked up at me, eyes narrowing. "You're saying they skipped county inspection?" "I'm saying they falsified internal reports and claimed jurisdiction over a shared-use structure. The park's open to the public. County safety laws apply whether they like it or not." Lowell sat back, exhaling. "That's enough to open an investigation. I'll send someone within 72 hours. "Make it sooner," I said. "If one swing failed, the others might too." He studied me for a long moment before nodding. "I'll see what I can do." When I left the office, the air outside felt different, cleaner, sharper, like the pressure had shifted. For the first time since the accident, I wasn't reacting. I was moving forward. The system that protected people like Karen was about to collide with one that answered to a higher authority. By the time I got home, my inbox was already filling. HOA emails, subject lines screaming in all caps, cease spreading, false claims, and defamation warning. Karen was working overtime to contain what she didn't yet understand. I ignored them all. The county clock was ticking now, and she couldn't pause it. That night, as I tucked Lily into bed, she asked, "Did you fix the swing, Dad?" "Not yet," I said, brushing her hair back. "But someone's coming who can." Her eyes fluttered closed, and I stood there for a while, watching her breathe. She didn't know how big this had become, how one act of cruelty was unraveling something built on years of deceit. I wish she never had to. Downstairs, I poured myself a cup of black coffee and stared at the HOA website. Karen had posted a new update. Community inspection planned by county officials. Cooperation required. Residents advised not to engage with unverified claims or outside parties. It was a warning disguised as leadership. She was preparing for damage control, but it didn't matter anymore because the process had already escaped her control. The following afternoon, I stood by the living room window when Terrell's car pulled into my driveway. He sat there for a long minute before stepping out, hands shoved into his jacket pockets. I met him halfway, sensing his nerves before he spoke. "She knows," he said quietly. "About the report. She called an emergency board meeting tonight. She's furious." "I expected that," I said. "The inspection's already scheduled." He hesitated, glancing back at his car. You don't understand. She's blaming me. She said if any documents leak, she'll sue for breach of confidentiality. I could see the panic written across his face, the twitch in his jaw, the way his fingers flexed against the keys in his hand. Terrell, I said, you did nothing wrong. The law protects anyone reporting a safety violation. He shook his head. You don't know Karen. She finds ways. Then we make sure she can't, I replied. He looked at me for a long time, conflict written across every muscle. Then, quietly, I have copies of the invoices, the supplier emails, everything, if the county needs them. He stopped, fear catching the rest of his sentence. They will, I said. And when they do, you'll be the reason no one else's kid gets hurt here. He nodded once, jaw tight. Just promise me she won't come after my job. I couldn't promise that, but I could promise something better. By the time this is over, Terrell, I said, she won't have a job left to protect. He gave a hollow laugh, half relief, half disbelief, then got back into his car. As he drove away, I watched the taillights fade down the street lined with perfect lawns and silent windows. Cedarbrook looked unchanged, but beneath its quiet surface, the cracks had begun. And soon, the whole structure Karen Ellison built was going to fail, just like the swing she refused to fix. It was close to midnight when my phone buzzed on the nightstand. The sound cut through the dark like a blade. I reached for it, half expecting another one of Karen's veiled threats, but it wasn't her. It was Terrell. The message was short, just an address and 5 words. You need to see this now. I threw on a jacket, slipped my keys from the counter, and drove. The streets of Cedarbrook were empty, each porch light identical, each driveway silent. His address led me to the maintenance storage unit behind the community pool, an off-limits facility marked with a sign that read, Authorized personnel only. Terrell was waiting by the door, his shoulders hunched, a hood pulled low over his head. When I stepped out of the truck, he looked both relieved and terrified. Karen's at a board dinner, he said quickly, voice trembling. She won't be back for an hour. I don't know how much longer I can keep quiet. The lock clicked open, and the metal door creaked as he rolled it up. Inside were shelves lined with paint cans, old playground parts, stacks of boxed paperwork. A fluorescent light flickered weakly overhead. Terrell shut the door behind us and turned, his hands shaking. Everything I told you before, about the missing reports. It's worse. I stayed quiet, letting him talk. The words poured out faster than he could stop them. Karen made me destroy the inspection forms, he said. The ones that showed Maple Hollow failed its structural review. The bolts were flagged months ago, before your daughter got hurt. I was supposed to file a reinspection request, but she told me to handle it internally. Then she sent an email saying the park had passed. My stomach clenched. You still have that email? He nodded. On a backup drive. I didn't delete it. I couldn't. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a small flash drive. The plastic casing cracked. These are the files, emails, purchase orders, budget changes, everything. I downloaded them the night she told me to wipe the logs. I shouldn't have done it, but... He trailed off, voice breaking. I kept thinking about my niece. She plays on that swing when she visits. I couldn't sleep after your daughter got hurt. I kept seeing her face. I took the drive gently, like holding something fragile and explosive. Terrell, I said, this isn't just paperwork. This is evidence of a safety violation. She falsified reports to save money. That's criminal negligence. He ran a trembling hand through his hair. I know. That's why I had to show you. But if she finds out I gave this to anyone... She won't, I said firmly. The county's already investigating. Once the inspector's involved, the files will go through official channels. It won't come back to you. He looked at me, eyes full of doubt. You don't understand how she operates. She has friends, lawyers, board members. Even her husband used to work for the insurance company that covers this place. If she finds out I talked, she won't, I repeated. And if she does, she won't have the power to do anything about it. He leaned back against the wall, exhaling like he'd been holding his breath for years. You know what she said when she made me fake those reports? She said, "No one cares about bolts. They care about property values." The words hung in the air like poison. That was her truth. Appearance over safety, image over accountability. I slipped the drive into my pocket. Tomorrow morning, I'll send this to the county inspector directly. After that, it's out of both our hands. He nodded, eyes glassy. I just want it over. I didn't start working here to cover up lies. I wanted to help keep things running. You did more than that, I said quietly. You stopped someone from getting hurt again. He gave a small, bitter laugh. Funny thing about Karen, she thinks she's protecting this community, but all she's done is make everyone afraid to speak. I reached for the door handle. Then tonight, I said, you just broke her silence. As we stepped outside, the cool air hit hard, carrying the faint scent of chlorine from the pool. The night felt heavier, but also cleaner. Terrell's secret was now mine to carry, and I understood what it meant. It wasn't just about my daughter anymore. It was about every family who'd stayed quiet out of fear. I looked back at the dimly lit maintenance unit before locking it again. Go home, Terrell, I said. Get some rest. You've done enough. He hesitated, then nodded. As he drove away, I stood alone in the parking lot, the flash drive burning cold in my pocket. Somewhere across town, Karen Ellison was still sipping wine, certain she controlled everything. But tonight, her perfect kingdom had a crack, and by morning, the county would see right through it. By sunrise, I was already at my desk, coffee going cold beside the keyboard. The flash drive sat in front of me like a live charge, one wrong move away from changing everything. I plugged it in, half expecting the files to be corrupted or encrypted. But they opened instantly. Terrell hadn't exaggerated. There were dozens of emails, invoices, and spreadsheets. Every message tied back to Karen Ellison. Each line was a thread in a web she thought no one would ever untangle. One email stood out immediately. Use RMX supplier for Maple Hollow repair. No need to refile inspection. Budget too tight for delays. The signature at the bottom was bold and unapologetic. Karen Ellison, HOA President. Attached was a scanned invoice showing the purchase of zinc hardware at half the cost of standard parts. The date was 3 months before Lily's fall. My pulse kicked faster. I scrolled through more messages. Terrell asking about rescheduling the inspection. Karen replying with a single line. Consider it done internally. I could practically hear her tone, that same smug certainty she wore like perfume. I copied the entire folder to an encrypted drive, labeled it Cedarbrook Liability, and drafted my report. This time, it wasn't just a list of safety concerns. It was a formal complaint under the Public Safety Misrepresentation Statute, complete with my engineer's certification. I attached the chain of evidence, including photos, timestamps, and Karen's digital signature. When I finished, I sent it to Inspector Lowell with the subject line, Priority, Falsified Safety Reports, Cedarbrook HOA. I hit send, and for a long moment, I just stared at the screen. The email icon blinked, then vanished. There was no taking it back. I just set a county investigation in motion. Outside, the morning light slanted across the street. Karen's SUV wasn't in her driveway. Either she was still asleep or already preparing her next move. I wasn't waiting to find out which. I grabbed my jacket in the backup drive, locked the door behind me, and drove straight to my office downtown. It wasn't much, a small space overlooking the river, filled with blueprints and draft tables. But it was mine, and more importantly, it wasn't under HOA surveillance. I printed every document from the flash drive and filed them into an evidence binder. I knew how these things went. The moment the county made contact, Karen would spin a narrative about miscommunication and clerical errors. I wasn't going to let her rewrite reality. Halfway through organizing the files, my phone rang. The caller ID read Karen Ellison. I let it go to voicemail. 10 seconds later, a text came through. I know what you've done. This will not end well for you. I took a slow breath, screenshot the message, and added it to the binder under Exhibit F, Retaliation Attempt. That afternoon, Inspector Lowell called. His tone was clipped but serious. Mr. Halpern, I've reviewed your submission, he said. I'm authorizing an immediate site inspection. I'd like you present when it happens. When? I asked. Tomorrow morning, 9 a.m. I thanked him, hung up, and leaned back in my chair. Tomorrow. The clock had started. That evening, Danielle stopped by my place with a batch of cookies Lily had helped her bake. You've stirred the hornet's nest, she said with a half smile. Karen's been calling an emergency meeting for tomorrow night. Says she'll address false accusations directly. Good, I said. She'll have company by then. Danielle raised an eyebrow. You're not scared? I was, I admitted. Not anymore. Fear's what she counts on. Once someone stops flinching, her whole act falls apart. Lily peeked from the hallway, shyly showing off the bluebird drawing she'd finished. Danielle smiled at her, then looked back at me. Whatever happens tomorrow, she said softly, you're doing the right thing. After she left, I sat on the porch, the neighborhood washed in quiet suburban stillness. The sprinklers ticked on schedule. The air smelled faintly of cut grass and chlorinated water from the pool. It was almost peaceful, like Cedarbrook was holding its breath. I thought of Terrell, of the way his hands trembled when he handed me the flash drive. People like him were the reason tyrants like Karen stayed in power, good people trapped in bad systems. But he'd made his choice, and now, so had I. As night settled, I opened my laptop one last time and backed up every file to a secure cloud. Then I closed it, knowing that by this time tomorrow, Karen Ellison's empire of paperwork and intimidation would face something she couldn't manipulate: state-certified inspection and public record. She built her power on silence. Tomorrow the county would arrive with microphones. By the time the sun broke over Cedarbrook the next morning, the whole neighborhood was already buzzing. Cars lined the streets, neighbors whispered in driveways, and the sound of Karen's voice carried from the park entrance like a broadcast signal. I parked a block away and walked the rest of the distance, binder in hand, feeling that strange calm that comes before something irreversible. Today wasn't just about one swing. It was about pulling the mask off everything that hid behind the word community. At Maple Hollow Park, Karen stood in a crisp white blazer, flanked by 2 board members and a man in a suit I didn't recognize. Her expression was pure confidence, the kind that comes from believing she's already won. Mr. Halpern, she said loudly the moment she saw me, I trust you're here to apologize for the confusion you've caused. Behind her, the county inspector, Lowell, was already unloading equipment from his truck. He carried a clipboard, a measuring device, and a small steel gauge used for checking tensile strength. No apology necessary, I said, keeping my tone even. You'll be needing these. I handed him copies of the binder's contents, neatly tabbed and labeled. Karen's smile faltered. This is private property, she snapped. Lowell didn't even look at her. Actually, ma'am, under Section 42B of County Code, all shared-use recreational structures fall under public safety jurisdiction. You received notice of inspection yesterday. Her mouth opened, then closed again. The gathered residents murmured, the sound rippling through the small crowd like a tide. Danielle stood near the back, arms folded, her expression unreadable, but her eyes locked on Karen. Lowell started his inspection immediately. He knelt beside the swing set, examined the bolts, and took photos. Non-compliant, he muttered, scribbling notes. He moved on to the climbing bars. Improper weld. Then the slide. Surface corrosion. No protective sealant. Every word struck like a hammer blow. Karen tried to regain control. I assure you, Inspector, all this equipment was professionally installed. Our HOA has strict standards. Lowell interrupted without looking up. If your standards overrule state safety law, then your HOA is operating illegally. Her face flushed crimson. The man beside her, the lawyer, I guessed, stepped forward, whispering something urgent. I caught fragments. Insurance liability. Possible suspension. Meanwhile, the crowd kept growing. Parents, retirees, joggers, all drawn by the noise. The same people who'd once looked away were now watching, their fear slowly giving way to curiosity. Lowell finished his notes, then turned to me. Mr. Halpern, your documentation checks out. We'll be issuing an immediate safety closure and an investigation into maintenance procedures. Karen stiffened. You can't just shut it down. This park is the centerpiece of our community. Then you should have treated it like one, I said quietly. Her lawyer stepped forward. You're creating panic, Mr. Halpern. The board will take this up internally. Not this time, I said. The county owns the next move. Lowell approached Karen with a yellow notice and affixed it to the park gate. The bold black letters read, Closed until further notice. County safety review pending. A collective gasp rose from the residents. Karen tried to tear it down, but Lowell's voice cut through the air. Ma'am, that's evidence. For the first time, she froze, not out of defiance, but out of fear. Terrell appeared at the edge of the crowd. His face was pale, but his eyes met mine. He gave a small nod, and I understood. The inspector must have already seen the files. Karen's house of cards wasn't collapsing. It had already fallen. I stayed silent, letting the scene unfold. People began whispering louder now, some filming with their phones. The control Karen had spent years building was unraveling in real time. Every neighbor who'd once stayed silent was witnessing the truth she'd buried under paperwork and intimidation. Lowell turned back to me. "Mr. Halpern, we'll need you to sign the official report as witness." "Gladly." I scrawled my signature across the line, the sound of pen on paper oddly satisfying. Karen took a step toward me, her voice low but venomous. "You think this makes you a hero? You've humiliated this community." "No," I said. "I've reminded it what accountability looks like." The inspector's team began packing their tools, the yellow notice fluttering in the breeze. For once, Karen had nothing left to say. Her SUV sat parked nearby, spotless as ever, but for the first time it looked small, like a symbol of something over-polished and hollow. As the crowd dispersed, Danielle approached me. "That was incredible," she whispered. "You did it." "Not yet," I said. "She'll fight back, but the investigation's public now. She can't hide what's coming." She smiled faintly. "You think she'll show up at the emergency meeting tonight?" "I'm counting on it." When I turned toward home, the morning felt different, brighter, lighter, like Cedar Brook had finally exhaled. The swing set stood behind me, motionless under its yellow tape, not as a symbol of damage anymore, but of exposure. For the first time since Lily's fall, I felt something close to peace, because Karen Ellison's world wasn't just cracking, it was officially under inspection. That night, the Cedar Brook Community Center parking lot was overflowing. The so-called emergency meeting had drawn out every homeowner, every whisperer who'd ever watched Karen Ellison from their blinds but never dared to confront her. Inside, the hall buzzed with tension. Folding chairs lined up in rows, a long table at the front draped with the HOA banner, and Karen sitting at the center like a queen on trial, pretending the throne was still hers. I walked in quietly, binder under my arm, and felt eyes turn toward me. Danielle gave a small nod from across the room, and Terrell stood near the back wall, visibly pale but present. His presence meant everything tonight. Without his testimony, Karen could still spin her story. But he hadn't run. That mattered. Karen's gavel slammed down on the table. "This meeting is now in session," she said, voice amplified by the old speaker system. "Before we begin, I'd like to address the smear campaign currently damaging our community's reputation." The murmurs started immediately. She raised her voice over them. "Certain individuals have spread false information to county authorities, resulting in an unnecessary shutdown of Maple Hollow Park. These actions have jeopardized our insurance coverage and public image. But I assure you, we will restore order." Her eyes locked on me. "Mr. Halpern, you've made quite the spectacle. Would you care to explain yourself to your neighbors?" I stood, feeling the heat of every stare. "Gladly." I placed the binder on the table before her and opened it to the first page. "These are inspection records falsified under your authorization," I said. "Emails, invoices, and supplier confirmations showing that you approved substandard materials in violation of county code. The county inspector verified the hardware this morning. That's why Maple Hollow is closed." Karen leaned back, forcing a laugh that didn't reach her eyes. "You're misinterpreting internal correspondence. Those documents aren't official." "They're signed with your name," I interrupted, "and your authorization number." The room fell quiet. Someone in the audience whispered, "She signed them?" And the whisper spread like wildfire. Karen's jaw tightened. "Even if that were true, it doesn't excuse you for bypassing HOA procedure. You had no authority to contact outside agencies without board consent." I met her gaze evenly. "Actually, I did. County code overrides private jurisdiction when public safety is involved. And since you misrepresented the park's maintenance status, that made it a county matter." Terrell shifted uneasily near the back, then took a step forward. The entire room seemed to hold its breath. His voice shook at first, but he didn't stop. "He's telling the truth," he said. "Karen ordered me to delete the failed inspection reports. I saved copies before she could." Gasps rippled through the audience. Karen's face went white. "Terrell," she hissed, You're out of line. He shook his head, trembling but resolute. You told me to call it an internal review. You said it would keep the budget balanced. I didn't say anything then, but a little girl got hurt because of those bolts. His voice broke slightly. I can't stay silent anymore. Karen slammed her gavel again. Enough! This is a private meeting. You're violating board confidentiality. But no one was listening. The crowd was murmuring louder now, phones recording, eyes narrowing with realization. Every perfect hedge, every freshly painted fence, all of it had been paid for by cutting corners elsewhere. I opened the binder again and slid a printed photo across the table, one of Lily's casted wrist, small and fragile beside the broken chain. You want to talk about confidentiality? I said. Tell that to every parent who trusted you to keep their kids safe. For a long, unbearable moment, no one spoke. Then Danielle rose from her seat near the front. I motioned to suspend Karen Ellison from her position pending investigation. A dozen hands went up immediately, then 24 more. The vote wasn't official yet, but the shift was. The room had turned. Karen stood, voice rising with desperation. You can't do this to me. I built this neighborhood. No, I said quietly. You built fear. The neighborhood's just choosing not to live in it anymore. Low murmurs turned into applause, hesitant at first, then steady, then unstoppable. Terrell lowered his head, tears glinting in his eyes. Karen sank back into her chair, her power dissolving beneath the weight of the evidence she'd once believed untouchable. I gathered my binder and turned to leave. As I stepped outside, the humid night air hit me like a rush of freedom. The lights from the hall spilled onto the pavement, flickering faintly against the darkness. Somewhere behind me, the gavel hit the table one last time, sharp, hollow, meaningless. The county's work wasn't finished, but Cedarbrook's silence was. The next morning, the headlines hit faster than I expected. County launches. Investigation into Cedarbrook, HOA safety violations. Someone had leaked the inspection report, most likely a resident who filmed the meeting. By noon, local reporters were parked along the front entrance of the subdivision, their vans and cameras breaking the illusion of control Karen had clung to for years. I stood near the park gate, yellow tape fluttering beside me, binder tucked under my arm. The air was heavy with humidity and anticipation. Residents crowded behind the reporters, whispering, pointing, piecing together the story they'd been too afraid to ask about. For once, the HOA couldn't filter the narrative. The truth was public property now. Karen arrived late, pulling up in her silver SUV like nothing had changed. She stepped out wearing sunglasses and that same rigid smile, but her composure cracked when she saw the crowd. Flashbulbs popped, microphones rose. Someone shouted, Mrs. Ellison, did you falsify county inspection reports? Another voice followed. Is it true your negligence injured a child? She froze mid-step, then forced her way toward the gate, her voice tight. I have no comment at this time. Then I do, I said, stepping forward. The cameras pivoted toward me. She turned sharply, face pale beneath the morning light. This man, she started, voice rising, is spreading lies for personal revenge. False, I said, cutting in. Everything I've claimed is documented and verified by the county. I held up the binder. This neighborhood deserves to know what really happened. The reporters pressed closer. Karen tried to speak again, but I was done letting her lead the script. For months, I said, turning to the crowd, the HOA cut corners to make budgets look good. They used cheap hardware that didn't meet safety standards, and when a child, my daughter, got hurt, they blamed us. The president ordered inspections to be falsified and silenced anyone who objected. Gasps rippled through the residence. Danielle stood near the front, her arms crossed but her eyes burning with quiet pride. He's right, she said. Karen fined me last year for planting sunflowers, but she ignored every complaint about this park creaking like it was falling apart. More voices joined in. A man shouted, My kid nearly fell off that slide last summer, another added. She fined me for a cracked driveway but couldn't fix a playground. The crowd's restraint broke, years of whispered frustration turning into open anger. Karen's lawyer tried to step between us, but she shoved him aside. You're all ungrateful, she yelled. Do you think any of you could run this place without me? I made this community beautiful. I stepped closer, lowering my voice so only she and the microphones could catch it. You made it terrified. There's a difference. A county inspector approached, clipboard in hand. Mrs. Ellison, the board has been notified of your temporary suspension. We'll need access to all administrative files for the investigation. Karen's voice cracked. You can't take my files. They're confidential. He shook his head. Not anymore, ma'am. They're evidence. She looked around like someone waking from a bad dream, seeing the faces she once controlled, now staring at her without fear. You think they'll thank you for this? She hissed at me. You've destroyed the reputation of every homeowner here. No, I said. I've restored it. Reputations built on lies collapse anyway. The cameras caught everything. Her trembling hands, her sharp breaths, the red spreading across her cheeks. She spun on her heel and stormed toward her SUV, shouting something about legal action. No one stopped her. No one followed. When she drove off, the air shifted again, like a storm finally breaking. Residents began to clap, hesitant at first, then louder. Terrell stood near the back, shoulders trembling with relief. The man who once avoided eye contact now looked straight at me and mouthed, "Thank you." I nodded but didn't smile. I wasn't celebrating. Not yet. This wasn't about humiliation. It was about accountability. I turned back to the inspectors, now speaking with neighbors, recording statements, measuring the park equipment. Reporters swarmed around me again. "Mr. Halpern," one asked, "what made you take this risk against your own HOA?" I looked past the cameras to the swing set behind the yellow tape. "Because silence is what people like her count on," I said. I didn't want my daughter growing up thinking justice was optional. As the cameras clicked and the microphones angled, closer, Lily's drawing came to mind, the one of the bluebird she'd taped to the refrigerator weeks ago. A bird small enough to break, but still free enough to fly. I exhaled slowly, feeling the weight of the past weeks lift, just enough to breathe again. Cedarbrook wasn't healed yet, but it was awake. And for the first time in years, the truth had an audience that refused to look away. 2 weeks later, Cedarbrook didn't look the same. The perfect symmetry Karen Ellison built, the identical hedges, the spotless sidewalks, the silence, had cracked open, and what replaced it was messy but real. Neighbors talked to each other now. People waved again. The park, still roped off with county inspection tape, had become a kind of gathering point, part construction zone, part confession booth. Everyone wanted to know what came next. The county's report came through officially that Monday morning. I sat at my kitchen table, coffee steaming beside the printed packet. The first page bore the bold header, Cedarbrook Estates HOA, Safety Compliance Violation Confirmed. The list of infractions filled 6 pages, falsified inspection records, unauthorized material substitutions, negligence in maintenance oversight, and obstruction of investigation. The last page was the one that mattered most. It named the responsible officer. President Karen Ellison, permanently removed from board authority, referred for state review. When I read it, I didn't smile. I just exhaled. It was over. Later that afternoon, the board held a community meeting to fill the vacant seats. The turnout was bigger than any HOA event I'd ever seen. Danielle sat beside me, and Terrell stood nervously near the podium, clutching a folded piece of paper. The new interim chair, a retired school teacher named Helen Cho, called the meeting to order. "Before we begin elections," she said, "I want to address what's brought us here. A system that's supposed to protect our homes should never become a weapon against them. What happened in Cedarbrook was more than a mistake. It was a betrayal." The crowd murmured in agreement. Helen turned to me. "Mr. Halpern, would you like to say something?" I rose slowly, every eye in the room following. "I didn't want to fight," I said. "I just wanted my daughter to be safe. When I realized the people in charge cared more about appearances than safety, I couldn't stay quiet. What happened to my family could have happened to anyone's. It shouldn't take an injury or an investigation to make leaders accountable." There was silence, then soft applause. Helen nodded. "Well said." She looked to Terrell. "Mr. Novak, you have something to add?" He stepped forward, voice steady for the first time since I'd met him. "I helped Karen hide those inspection reports," he said plainly. "I was wrong. I thought I was protecting the neighborhood's reputation. I should have protected the people in it. I'm sorry." The room stayed silent for a beat. Then someone in the back said, "Took guts to admit that." A few claps followed, then more. Terrell looked like the weight of the world had slid off his shoulders. After the meeting, Helen approached me privately. "The board's appointing you to the new safety committee," she said. "You won't have to deal with policy. You'll just make sure things stay honest." I smiled faintly. That I can do. When I drove home, the sun was setting over Maple Hollow Park. The yellow tape was gone, and new equipment gleamed under the fading light. Stainless steel, county approved. Every bolt exactly where it should be. The contractor waved at me through the fence, shouting, "Tomorrow we hang the swings!" Lily's laughter echoed from the back seat. "Dad, can we go tomorrow?" "You bet," I said. "We'll be the first in line." That night, I walked through the quiet streets alone. Without Karen's SUV cruising by, the neighborhood finally felt like it belonged to the people again. I passed houses I'd never really noticed before. Porches with lights on, kids' bikes left in driveways, real life spilling back into the place that had once been suffocatingly perfect. When I reached the park, I stopped by the new sign posted at the entrance. It read, "Maple Hollow Park, reconstructed 2025, dedicated to community integrity." Below that, in smaller letters, "For every child who was told they didn't matter." I stood there for a long time, thinking about everything that led here. The confrontation, the humiliation, the long nights of doubt. All of it had come down to one truth. The moment people stop being afraid, control loses its power. As I turned to leave, I saw Terrell walking with his niece near the fence. He caught my eye and gave a quiet nod. It wasn't a thank you. It was something better, a sign of shared understanding, the kind that can only exist between people who survived the same storm. Lily tugged at my hand when I got home, asking if she could draw something for the park. I told her yes, and she pulled out her crayons, sketching a bird with open wings. "It's not flying away," she said. "It's staying." I pinned it on the fridge beside the county's final report, both reminders of what happens when truth wins over fear. And if you want more stories of homeowners standing up to HOA tyranny, hit subscribe right now, share your story in the comments, and let me know where you're watching from.